One of the best aspects of Monster Hunter is the sheer variety of ways to play the game. This is all thanks to the various weapons and sheer amount of builds or sets that you can create. So I'm Darcblade with an Anti-Alatreon build for the Lance in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now the main purpose of an anti-build is to create a set that is made to counter a specific monster in the game. In this episode we're looking at countering Alatreon, providing hunters with two builds to take on the blazing black dragon, one safe, one risky. The Lance, in all honesty, is a very effective weapon at taking on Alatreon. Its quick poke attacks means that it can capitalise on elemental damage, and this combined with the large shield means that you can pretty much block the vast majority of Alatreon's attacks bar its ultimate. Top this off with a long reach and accurate attacks, it means that you can really take on Alatreon quite comfortably with this weapon. So the first build is the risky Anti-Alatreon Lance build. This build shares similarities to other risky builds in this series, as it uses the Safi Jiva armor to provide us a ton of DPS potential with the downside of draining our health. So for this build you'll need the Safi Crested Crown Beta, Crested Chest Beta, Crested Van Braces Beta, Crested Belt Beta and Crested Boots Beta. I'm also using a Fury Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the Kiar Crest King, although you can use any other Kiar weapons if you so desire. This has a health regen augmentation and an elemental up augmentation. As for the custom mods, I've gone for a combination of elemental up and attack increases. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference. When it comes to the jaws, you've got a lot to play around with here. So first of all, I've gone for blaze jaws to give us the fire attack skill. Of course, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you would replace the blaze jaws to max whatever new element you were using. I've then gone for vitality jaws for the health boost skill, iron war jaws for the guard skill, resistor jaws to max out blight resistance, tenderizer jaws for weakness exploit, and a sharp jaw for protective polish. As for the jaws on the mantles, I've simply gone for expert jaws for some critical eye and protection jaws for some divine blessing. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina. When you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables, you have a raw attack of 660 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have 50% base affinity. This is with the true Dragon Vein Awakening buff in effect. This will be 100% when you consider weakness exploit and you're attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized through clutch claw attacks first. You have a fire elemental rating of 1130. Again, this is taking into account the buff that true Dragon Vein Awakening will give us. And you have a decent defense of 1081 that is strong against every element except for dragon. So as for the skills, first of all you have fire attack at level 6. Fire attack increases the fire rating and damage of this build. Of course, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you would replace fire attack level 6 to match whatever other element you were using. You have resentment level 5. Resentment is a skill that increases our raw attack whenever there is a portion of red health on our health bar. And as this build, whether we're blocking attacks or damaging monster, will constantly give us a portion of red health on our health bar, it means that the resentment at level 5 should always be active. You have guard level 5, increasing the effectiveness of blocking attacks. This basically reduces the knockback when we block an attack, as well as the stamina cost for blocking that said attack. Guard at level 5 could be considered a little bit excessive with the Lance, as the guard is already strong, but it gives us added security and means that we can pretty much effectively block all of Alatreon's attacks with minimal consequences, bar its ultimate. Anyway, you have health boost level 3, increasing our maximum health to that potential 200. You have blight resistance level 3, allowing us to be completely immune to all elemental blights, which is great for the Alatreon hunt, which means we don't have to take null berries into a hunt as well. You have critical boost level 3. Critical boost is a skill that increases the damage of our attacks when they crit a monster. However, it only increases the damage rating of the attack portion of our attacks. So imagine an attack being divided into two portions. One half is from the attack value of a build, the other from the elemental or ailment portion of a build. Critical boost basically only increases the attack portion. Anyway, you have weakness exploit level 3. Weakness exploit is a skill that increases our affinity when we're attacking monster weak points. And as the Lance is quite an accurate weapon, you can really make use of this. On top of that, should these weak points be tenderized through clutch claw attacks first, then the bonus affinity that weakness exploit provides is increased even further. Weakness exploit at level 3 can give us a potential extra 50% affinity, bringing this build up to that 100% affinity. Anyway, you have Evade Window level 3, which is a byproduct of the armor. It can still be useful. Evade Window increases the invulnerability frames when we perform dodges or hops in the case of the Lance. Anyway, you have Protective Polish level 1. Protective Polish is a useful skill that allows us to put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time after we sharpen the weapon. You also have Critical Element level 1, which is like critical boost but for the elemental portion of our attacks. So when our attack crits a monster, the elemental damage will be increased. And finally, when you're wearing your mantles, we'll have Critical Eye at level 2, increasing the base affinity of this build, and we'll have Divine Blessing at level 2, which is a skill that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster. Finally, we'll have the set bonus to Safi'jiiva Seal, True Dragon Vein Awakening, which is a buff that is activated whenever we have our weapon drawn. With our weapon drawn, we'll gain an extra 40% base affinity, and we'll gain an extra 150 elemental rating. We'd also gain a bonus element rating if we were using an element weapon, but we're not, so we don't have to worry about that part of this buff. However, there is a downside to all of this. With each attack, while this buff is activated, with each attack, it will drain our health, leaving a portion of red health on our health bar. This can leave us at risk, as red health is pretty much counted as health lost. Should we sheath the weapon and stop attacking, the red health will recover itself naturally over time, but it still leaves us at risk of carting should we take a hit from a monster. However, should we continuously attack a monster, then after a certain number of consecutive attacks, this health drain will be counted out as the True Dragon Vein Awakening will initiate a heal, healing us for the health it drained. So it really adds to the name of this build, which is the risky Anti-Alatreon build. But there we have it. This build may be risky, but it's definitely one of the highest damaging builds out there. But there are pros and cons to every build. With this build, its biggest pros come in the form of its high elemental and high raw attack damage. Having maxed out elemental attack, combined with skills such as resentment, crit boost and that, it means that we can power down Alatreon quite quickly with this lance build and finish the hunt. On top of that, the other pro for this build is that this build is quite defensive. Having maxed out guard is the key to this, meaning that we can pretty much block all incoming attacks. And even though we don't have the guard up skill, thanks to the shield duel, thanks to the Lance's natural ability to initiate this skill by performing the power guard for a certain number of seconds, then this build is still strong when it comes to defense. And finally, when it comes to the pros, is the True Dragon Vein Awakening itself, providing us a ton of DPS buffs for simply having the weapon drawn. But on the flip side, there are cons. The biggest con for this is the mirror opposite when it comes to the True Dragon Vein Awakening in the form of the health drain, leaving us at risk at times, but this can be countered slightly thanks to the health regen augmentation and careful play. And the other con for this build is, unfortunately, this build sometimes has sharpness issues, as we only have a small portion of white sharpness. But regardless, if you're looking for a build that can easily do Alatreon, and you don't mind using the Safi'jiiva armor, then I'd strongly recommend this one. Which brings us on to the next build, which is the safe Anti-Alatreon Lance build. This build forgoes the health drain found on the previous build in favour of a less risky one that still can output a high amount of elemental DPS. So for this build you'll need the Kaiser Crown Beta, the Kaiser Mel Beta, the Kaiser Van Braces Beta, Kirin Hoop Beta and the Brachydium Greaves Beta. I'm also using an Ironside Charm 5 and for my weapon I'm using the Kiar Crest Stream. This has a health regen augmentation, elemental up augmentation, and then when it comes to the custom upgrades I've gone for increasing the elemental rating of this weapon. As for the specialist tools, as always, these are down to personal preference. So when it comes to the jewels, you've got a fair few to play around with. First of all, we've gone for frost jewels as we're using an ice weapon. This will max out the frost attack skill of this build. Of course, much like all builds, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you'd replace the frost jewels to match whatever new element you were using. I've then gone for expert jewels for some critical eye, vitality jewels for health boost, resistor jewels to max out blight resistance, and then I've gone for guardian jewels for the offensive guard skill. As for the jewels and the mantles, I've gone for attack jewels for attack boost and protection jewels for divine blessing. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which would be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have a raw attack of 658 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have 50% base affinity, which can be 100% when you take into account weakness exploit. You have an elemental rating of 990 with a OK defense of 993 that is strong against fire, thunder and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you have Critical Eye level 7, which increases the raw affinity of this build. You have Ice Attack at level 6. Again, like I said, if you were using a weapon with a different element, you would replace this to match whatever new element you were using. You have Guard level 5, Health Boost level 3, Blight Resistance level 3, Weakness Exploit level 3, Offensive Guard level 3. Offensive Guard is a useful skill for the Lance, especially when you're utilizing skills like Guard. Basically every time you perfectly time a block, Offensive Guard will be activated, which will increase the raw attack of the build. And as we should be blocking and counter attacking monsters quite a lot with this build, Offensive Guard should be active most of the time as long as we continue our assault and read the monster correctly. Anyway, you have Latent Power level 2, a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but it is kind of useful. Latent Power is a skill that kicks in after you've been fighting a monster for a set amount of time, or you've taken enough damage from that said monster. When this happens, you'll gain increased affinity as well as reduced stamina consumption. Anyway, you have Heat Guard level 1, another byproduct of the armor that prevents any damage from hot areas such as the lava zones in the Guiding Lands or Elder's Recess. You have Critical Element level 1, and when you're wearing your mantles, you have Attack Boost level 2, increasing the raw damage of this build, and Divine Blessing level 2. As for the set bonus, you only have one of them, which is Teoster's Technique, Master's Touch, which prevents any sharpness loss when our attacks crit a monster, which means that with this build we shouldn't have to sharpen our weapon much at all. So there we have it, that's the safe Anti-Alatreon build I tend to use. But of course, even this comes with pros and cons. Its biggest pro is again its damage output, both in terms of elemental and raw attack. Utilising skills such as Ice Attack, Critical Eye, Weakness Exploit, and Offensive Guard, it means that we're able to take on Alatreon quite effectively with this build. On top of that, again, it's another strong defensive build. Utilising Guard, Health Boost and Blight Resistance, it gives us quite a strong defense. And then finally, when it comes to the pros, this build shouldn't really have to worry about sharpness whatsoever thanks to its high affinity and Master's Touch skill. But there are cons. The biggest con for this build is it relies on Weakness Exploit. You have to have a monster body part tenderized to make the most out of this build, as you need that 100% affinity, not only for your increased damage output thanks to Critical Element, but also to minimize sharpness loss as well. And the final con, which is really a minor one, which is unfortunately this build has lower defense than some of the other builds found in this little mini series. But regardless, if you don't like the health drain found on the Safi Jiva armor, as well as having to manage your sharpness gauge, I would strongly recommend this build. It's effective, fun, and can easily bring down Alatreon. So there we have it, those are two builds I can recommend for taking on Alatreon with the Lance. Now of course, as you farm the monster more and more, you'll get Alatreon gear and weapons which have high elemental ratings and defense, which will allow you to take on the hunt a little bit more easily. But until then, these builds will work just fine. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you Anti-Alatreon builds for the Lance in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.